Okay. Welcome to our e-lecture series on the Middle East after the Gaza war. Today our topic is a humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
I have the pleasure of having Nicholas Papachrysostomou with us to talk about the humanitarian crisis in Gaza as part of our lecture, as Zakia said, our series of lectures on the Gaza war. A brief introduction of Mr. Papachrysostomou. He's head of mission and emergency coordinator at Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières. During November and December 2023, he was in Gaza, setting up the MSF response. He has also participated in numerous emergency missions around the world with MSF, ranging from Colombia and Congo to search and rescue operations in the Central Mediterranean, Bangladesh, Yemen, Iraq, Cameroon, and Spain during the COVID-19 pandemic, amongst other missions. So we are very pleased to have you with us, Mr. Papachrysostomou. It's going to be an extremely interesting conversation. We're going to learn a lot because the truth of the matter is that the past lectures were extremely interesting, but they were based on foreign policy or even domestic policy. This is our chance to learn a bit more about the humanitarian aspects of the crisis in Gaza. So, Mr. Papachrysostomou, the floor is yours.
Good evening, everybody. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are. And thank you for coming. And I will take that opportunity to thank also the Center for Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Islamic Studies of the Department of Political Science and International Relations at the University of the Peloponnese for having us, for inviting us, for giving us this opportunity to share our témoignage, our testimony. I'd like to set the frame for this evening. I will speak of the humanitarian consequences. It's going to be a heavy lecture, and you will see that my slides are intense and very dense. I apologize for that. It's very difficult to leave things out and to know how to do this. I've been updating these slides since I've come out, since January, and it's been since I've begun speaking out from my experience and from, of course, the continuation, because then I worked on Cyprus, I worked on the Maritime Corridor, I worked on Gaza from different aspects after I had come out, like January, February, March, April. And it's been difficult to update these slides. The trends are incredibly disheartening. The numbers are steadily, I would even take out the word steadily, they're shooting upwards, and you will see it. Unfortunately, this crisis has proven that we have no mechanism of those that we have set up after the world wars to stop something like that from happening again. Hence the reason why you see on the first slide the word the humanitarian crisis, because this is unprecedented. The Gazans say that. I mean, I didn't know a lot. I hadn't been in Gaza before, right? I went to Gaza after this war. I've been in different and very complex crises around the world, but I've never seen anything like this. So for me, it is really unprecedented. And the Palestinians know how difficult things are given the context, right? And I will say that the Israelis also have gone through a heinous attack on the 7th of October, just to set the scene straight, right? The way the things happened since the 7th of October and up until now have shown no mercy from either party in different scales, of course, and we will speak about that. Studying Scarlet being the color of blood. So forgive me for those of you that are very well versed in this crisis. I will give some, shall we say, introductory remarks on where we are, okay? And I will begin by first of all telling you that the pictures you will see here, they are few pictures. There's not a lot of pictures, but those that you will see are my pictures. So these are as real as my eyes, okay? I wanted it to be this way. I know that they're outdated, they're 5 months old. And you will see that my experience, the experience of the Doctors Without Borders, whether it's from November or December or January or March or May, it tells the same tale. It's the same thing. We keep seeing the same things. So it's incredible to see that what I thought could have been outdated is not. Okay, what you see in front of you, I gather, that is pretty much a market, a supermarket from the boxes. It's funny that I didn't really pay too much attention to this as I was driving down the road to go to the clinic that we were opening at the time. And then one day I just realized that whatever I hadn't really paid attention to was just rubble. So I saw a hole on the road and I stopped because I thought, okay, there was something here that is no longer. I then went on to understand that this was going to be daily life for me. So every time we went down the road, there were things missing. And what was missing was life. So, I mean, there were businesses missing, there were houses missing, there were mosques missing. Something was missing day by day. And this is, I repeat, these were not, they were part of daily life in Gaza. They were not bases or fighter bases or, I mean, they were people, okay? I will set the stage with something that's, again, very real. This is an audio message that we used to leave audio messages at night and send them out, because that was the only way we had to communicate what we were seeing. And these messages are voices from the darkness of the nights amidst bombings. And practically what we were seeing was a dead end in front of us. So we tried to communicate that. And then when we had a connection, the voices would send. So all of this is public. Eh? So I will put the message.
It's difficult to describe what is happening around us. Humanitarian needs are immense. There's no gas, and without gas, nothing can move. You can't cook food. The treatment plants of water do not function properly, so there's not enough water to drink. Conditions of hygiene, sanitation, very precarious, and IDPs are everywhere. The density of population is incredible. Houses that we saw yesterday, for example, driving down the street, are no longer there. And it's incredible to think that lives vanish in the split of a second here. There's a constant suffering of loss. The mental health of the people is very difficult to even decipher. Recently, we have reactivated our activities, and we've been supporting very recent primary healthcare. And of course, the center is overcrowded, hundreds of people. Chronic patients without medication, sexual and reproductive health minimally functioning due to the lack of gynecologists. First day that we were here, 750 patients walked in. The team of MSF was able to see a quarter of them. It's incredible to see how the local community and the local health practitioners carry on their work in the midst of very difficult conditions. The MSF team is here to stay and support the population as much as possible in these very dire conditions.
Right. So this is what I
It's
thought.
difficult to describe.
This is what I thought were difficult conditions back in December. I understand that now things are 100, if not 1,000 times worse. I can't even begin to imagine how things are now. So, I mean, I hear my words and basically what I think of is the same things. I mean, if I had recorded the message now, it would apply and more so. Just a few things about the strip for those that may not have been following the context, and I will go faster now. So, very small place. This shouldn't have been a difficult humanitarian mission for the actors that are experienced, right? It's a 41 kilometer long and 6 to 12 kilometers wide, depending on. It's a strip of land, so easy roads, passages, paths, infrastructure. I mean, it's not Congo. This is not about getting there. Okay, it should have been easy. I've never seen anything more difficult in terms of access than Gaza. And it's just a droplet of land. That's it. 2.3 million. This leads us to the density. It was calculated before, about 6,500 people per square kilometer. When I was in, they were attempting their first recalculations given the first waves of displacement in the south. So the density in Rafah was reaching 19,000 per square kilometer. That at the time, the sleepy city of Rafah of 250,000 was reaching maybe 500,000. Now, with the waves, after the destruction of Khan Yunis, after what happened in the middle area, and of course the north, I mean, Rafah is a place of, some people place it around 1.5, 1.7, the greater Rafah area. And then, of course, you have displacement upon displacement. That makes it very difficult. But can you imagine how the landscape changes? Because when I was there, when we opened our first clinic, or our third clinic, because the story of opening and closing will become very apparent here, okay? It was in split seconds, you had tents around you. The clinic was surrounded by tents. People were everywhere. So the density issue is very difficult to fathom unless you see it. 17-year-old blockade, which means that Gaza was a dependent piece of land, a dependent population on humanitarian aid way before this destruction. So unemployment, education, 60% of the population requiring food assistance to begin with. No access to the fishing waters, water was being piped, okay, from Israel. It needs to be desalinated. So difficult conditions to, anyway, then all of the infrastructure was either cut or destroyed. So naturally you have, from a crisis, you go to a catastrophe. Electricity was being supplemented by purchases. I mean, if it weren't for certain generators and some fuel, no hospital would have been able to function, right? I'm not talking about houses here. I will talk to you about basic necessities. And then the aid pre-war, before the 7th of October, was being calculated as 500 trucks a day. This idea about counting trucks is a big mistake, okay? Everybody does it. How many trucks a day? It's not about trucks. Let alone the fact that we are it's one of the indicators, right? But if you have the aid in and you have no way of distributing it, or you don't have enough people, or you don't have securitized routes for aid to reach where it should reach, it doesn't matter how many trucks you get in. One example is that, and Israel says that, I mean, we have the crossing point is open, you can get the trucks to the crossing point. The question is, who's going to drive the trucks from the Gazan side to where they should go, when in fact it is about crossing a war zone, because Rafah now is a war zone. So of course aid doesn't move, right? 80% reliant on aid. This is based on the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights, right? So this is the strip pre-war. Keep that in mind as we traverse stage by stage the humanitarian crisis. Just to clarify a few things, I hope you can see my map. So what you see in this creamy color is the Palestinian territories, right? So that's where the West Bank is, that's where Gaza is. Gaza is the strip that you see bordering Egypt. That's important also because a lot of the aid was going to go through Egypt. Keep in mind the Mediterranean Sea, because there was also attempt to bring aid from Cyprus through the famous maritime corridor that the Americans suggested could work. The Israelis accepted it, the Europeans were elated about it, and of course the Cypriots also were happy to play a role in this. That, of course, up to now never worked. And really, the problem of the supply would have been easy, because it's not a big deal to get aid into a strip if you have your crossings open. Land is by far the easiest way to get it in, either from the north or from Egypt or from the east, right? All you need to do is open the borders, right? And then you see, of course, the middle land, which is the State of Israel. That's just for the region, right? The star is Jerusalem, etc. I'm not going to go into the West Bank because we don't have enough time here. Gaza is enormous in terms of significance. A bit on conflict evolution and another map that will place you a little better before we begin discussing the consequences in more detail. So the takeover began, the ground operation began right after the 7th of October from the north. And these were the places, Jabalia, Gaza North, the Gaza City, that were invaded first, okay, in a very disproportional way. You'll hear this word many a time during this lecture. Proportionality is part of the international humanitarian law, okay? When you hit from everywhere in a very, as I've explained, a very densely populated place, the math will do the work for you. There is no way you can spare civilians. Practically speaking, there is no way. It's just too dense. So, ground operations from north to the south. When I was in Khan Yunis, I will show you on the map, it's the city towards the south. The word comes to the south, okay, quite early on, so 35, 40 days or so. The city of Khan Yunis becomes the epicenter. That's when they said that it's not enough to deal with the north, because Hamas also hides in the south. So operations began from the west. Naval fire. We could hear when we displaced ourselves during the first weeks to the west coast, okay, because that was the designated safe zone. There is no safe zone in Gaza, as I will explain and demonstrate soon, okay? Then the naval fire could be heard daily. North and east were ground battlefields with tanks and artillery. South, and including the Rafah, the area was receiving indiscriminate airstrikes. And when I say that, I mean you were sitting in the clinic or in a primary health care or in a hospital, and as you were talking to the patient, the sound, the mere sound of the strike was so much bigger than life, and that, for, shall we say, by accident or by a turn of luck, did not hit you, okay? But it was so big that you had to stop, or at least we had to stop. But I've seen also Palestinian Gazans stop, people that are used to bombings, because it was multiple pounding, and you had to take stock and realize that you are alive and then you can go on talking to the patient. Deir el-Balah, that's the middle area, then becomes the epicenter, repeated pattern with drones and snipers around the hospitals and everything, as you all know. And then on the 6th of May, the assault on Rafah begins. And then we have about 1 million displaced from Rafah since then, in May, and about 100,000 still displaced in North Gaza. 1.9, 1.7 is the total number of displaced people. Displaced people doesn't mean that they came to the south, although the striking majority of them did. But it doesn't mean that. It means that they left their homes. They're somewhere else. They begin with coping strategies. They don't eat. They have to reorientate their lives. 1.9 million in a very small area, still being under fire. And then the humanitarian corridors, I mean, this is a bit of a contradiction in terms because there is none, okay? And I will take you to the map and you will see now. So you see the map appearing before you now. This is a zoom on Gaza. And here I'd like you to note that with a few animations, I'm going to try and show the situation as it stands. But please be aware that the kind of pinky cream areas are war zones. So you see west of Rafah and the entire strip there alongside with Egypt is a war zone. The middle area north of Deir el-Balah and across the fence is a war zone. And of course, the north has never ceased operations, right? Gaza North and the city of Gaza. So this is where active fighting happens. But of course, you have airstrikes everywhere, right? Then I don't know if you see my cursor. I hope you do. But around the area of Deir el-Balah, which is the black spot that I put in the center, okay, there we've had tremendous bombings recently in the Nuseirat camp with hundreds killed, right? We have a hospital here that we support, the Al-Aqsa Hospital, overwhelmed completely, women and children. Okay, this is what we see in the hospitals. We know what we are seeing in the hospitals, okay? So the 4 black spots are the urban areas. So Gaza city, Deir el-Balah, Khan Yunis, Rafah, respectively, right? So this is what you should see, what you should focus. These are the more densely populated areas. Then you have the corridors. You will realize that there is 2 arteries, okay, north-south. One is the coastal. It's called Al-Rashid, the coastal area. If you see my cursor, I hope you are seeing it. This is the coastal area. You'll see that there is no artery that is completely blue, which means there is no route that is completely accessible. Okay. Then you see bombings in the west. I'll show you how the map unfolds. The Salah al-Din Road, which is the central north-south corridor, is again infested with Reds and also checkpoints. See, one checkpoint in Al-Rashid, one checkpoint in what should we call it? Salah al-Din. These checkpoints control traffic, control the flow of aid. They close, they open. Okay, it's quite difficult to imagine an unhindered flow of aid. Okay, you have holding points here and here. Okay, on the corridors. Again, all of these point out to obstructed aid. According to international humanitarian law, Israel, being the occupying force, should ensure that aid flows and humanitarian personnel. None of that. The south is a mess. Okay, the corridor with Egypt now is a war zone. It's been a month and a bit that this is no longer traversable. Rafah, which was the main crossing point for evacuations as well, has been closed since the 7th of May. Kerem Shalom is open here, the point with Egypt, for pre-approved goods, okay? But again, it closes open, and it's it's logistically non-viable, right? Because it's within the war zone. So from the Gaza side of the crossing, it's not easy to drive trucks to bring people, even for the rotations. It's been hell bringing our people to the point of Karem Shalom so that they exit from Israel and into Jordan. But how do you cross the south if it's a war zone? So I'm afraid it's not true when we say that aid flows. Same with the north. The Erez West point is again not adequate, as you'll see from the numbers. And look at what's happening now. You have bombings not just in the areas that are designated, but everywhere. And then look at the arrows that show you displacement. This is the recent displacement, because there have been, in May, there have been evacuation orders still. So about 1 million people have done what the arrows show you, okay? And that's what happens. People move, and they move to the west, and they move to the south, and they've been moving all along. And there is no safe space. The Al-Mawasi area that you hear, it's not marked on the map, but it's between Rafah and Khan Yunis on the coast. That's the safe area. And as of today, actually, it was being announced in the media that there have been strikes in Al-Mawasi. So no corridors. 249 days of war, longest, largest, and bloodiest since 1948. There has been nothing that compares. If you divide simply the deaths by the number of days, you arrive at a death toll that is incredibly high. 150 per day. It doesn't compare neither to Syria, it's about 96. It was, at least. Sudan, these are the death tolls fluctuate. Iraq, Ukraine, Afghanistan, Yemen, nothing comes close. Okay, so let's talk about the atrocities of war. The heinous attack of the 7th of October cost the lives of 1,200 people, 250 hostages, 120 still held captives. We've denounced this attack completely and straight out. 5,400 injured, according to the Israeli authorities, on the day, right? Then you have the casualties, about 294 soldiers dead and 1,900 injured since the start of the ground operations. These is Israeli casualties, okay? And of course, all the crimes that have been investigated, okay, during this inhuman attack, okay? Then we move forward. According to the Ministry of Health of Gaza, of Hamas, 37,000 dead, 85,000 almost injured in the course of 250 days. Count the months from the October, November, December, and then 5 months until May, about 8 days, 8 months, right? 10,000 missing, nobody knows, rubble and whatnot. And then according to OCHA, 40% of these is male, are males. 40% of the 37,000. This leaves us with about 23,000, okay? About 23,500 dead that are not men. Children and women. It's incredible to think that. For some, it was 20%. Others put it to 15,000 children, 10,000 children. I don't know, but that can't be right, right? What international law justifies these numbers of children dead? These are dead children. Let alone if we go into the 85,000 and break it down. Maimed children. I've never seen a population that looks like the Gazans. Crutches is a way of life. 70% of the population internally displaced, 1.7. Of course, you might tell me that we have crises in the world that are that have caused displacements that are much bigger. It's not about comparing. This is a very small piece of land. And the risks are immense. And we're not doing, as you'll see, we're not doing much. And we're not doing it fast enough. That's clear. There's about 350,000 children in Gaza, 350,000 children that are less than 5 years old. These are the kids that have not developed their immunities. So the risk of stunting is enormous. Epidemics, cholera, hepatitis, given the conditions that these children live in. So acute malnutrition is not a theoretical concept here, as you'll see from some of our numbers. Okay, we haven't seen it yet. And as MSF, I have to tell you that we cannot report that we are seeing severe acute malnutrition in percentages. But I have to also tell you that we have no way of seeing it because we do not know what's going on past the middle area. And we are not responding at scale in order to know these things. So the risks are very real. More than half of the buildings destroyed. This was World Bank back in January. 60% of the residences. Imagine how that percentage changed. 80% of commercial. So that's disruption of life. Then we go to the north, which is pretty much biblical catastrophe, place of the skull. There is 12 emergency medical teams deployed. None in the north of Gaza, according to WHO, as of the 9th of June. None. There's a lot of people still in the north of Gaza. Some say they estimate 300,000 people. How do they live? And then, of course, the West Bank. Nobody's really paying attention. But I mean, the West Bank is in turmoil with incursions. I remind you of the deadly incursion in Tulkarm. 50 people dead, 5,000 injured. It's not a stable situation as we know. And if the West Bank destabilizes, and who knows what can happen. So, I mean, this is not easy to understand. You want more statistics? I mean, there's more than 3 people dead in every 200. If you consider that the Palestinian families are extended families, then you can see that each and every family has lost people of their own. And then, of course, we all know that South Africa filed a case. I will talk a little more, if I have time, about the International Court of Justice and the case filed accusing Israel of genocidal acts or of not taking precautions to prevent acts of genocide. Let's move on to the humanitarian needs in a bit more detail. So the integrated food security phase classification is basically a mechanism that tells us when malnutrition is escalating. So they are reporting an imminent famine. Okay. In fact, they are reporting phase 5, which is the maximum level of catastrophic famine for 1.1 million people. Then they have phase 4 for about 850,000, which is the emergency phase. And then they have phase 3, which is a critical phase for 265,000. So all in all, nobody's eating well. Nobody's eating, like the striking majority are not eating well. So just to understand, we as MSF cannot say because we can't see, right? But what we do see in our medical facilities as Doctors Without Borders is a widespread food insecurity and hunger. Are we responding adequately? No, we're not. We're not. Okay, and I want to admit that as we are right now, our response, Doctors Without Borders, and at large, the humanitarian response in Gaza is a droplet. Whoever tells you that aid is flowing and that we are supporting hospitals and there is enough field hospitals inside, they're lying. They're lying because the numbers that we do not consider exaggerated, okay? So the scale of the numbers is not considered an exaggeration because we've seen mass casualty plans, events, hundreds of deaths and hundreds and thousands of injured ourselves. So based on this, I can tell you that we're not doing anything. Right, health. 17 out of 36 hospitals are partially functioning. Some are very partially functioning, so they can't. Very little fuel, very little possibility of really responding to the volumes of surgical interventions needed. 40% of primary healthcare is dead, and by primary healthcare, so that I don't speak in jargon, I mean everything that is not war related. I have to tell you that in Gaza, there's 160,000 pregnant women. Now, demographically speaking, 160,000 pregnant women. How are they going to give birth? Where are they going to give birth? Is it going to be safe? What of complications? There's 6 field hospitals inside, 2 are partially functioning. We as Doctors Without Borders are awaiting approval for another 2 field hospitals. And we're speaking with the coordination of the territories, COGAT, in order to get 2 hospitals in, because we think that the system of health has collapsed. So we need field hospitals in. We can't be supporting the existing structures anymore. There's no medical personnel, there's no supplies, narcotics, analgesics, psychotropics. I told you about the hindered flow of aid. I will also go back to the number of trucks after. Infectious diseases, look at some of the numbers. They are really daunting. By the 19th of May, we had about 850,000 acute respiratory infections. Remember the children. For the children, these acute respiratory infections can cause damage. The diarrheas reached 500,000. Infected wounds, you don't want to know. Given the conditions in the tents, given the lack of hospitals to keep the patients in, primary healthcare is being confused. The little clinics are doing things that should be done by the hospitals. And in terms of mental health, a sense of loss is everywhere. UNICEF calculates 1 million children in need of mental health and psychosocial support. 1 million children that have seen all this that we talk about, right? Since the Rafah crossing stopped, closed a month ago because of the assault, we had about 1,550 patients that were waiting to be evacuated because they couldn't be held inside Gaza and they had to be evacuated to other countries that are still pending. And God knows how many more patients need to get out, but they can't. Because of many things, politics, whatever. I mean, it's not easy to get patients out. Let's talk about the famous WASH acronym, water, sanitation, hygiene. The pipelines are partially functioning from Israel. So water is coming in partially. 2 out of the 3 desalinations operate, the desalination plants, which means not enough desalinated water exists. There's 340,000 tons. 340,000 tons. That makes it about 340 million kilos of solid waste and 2 landfills that cannot be accessed. I'll show you a picture. Non-food items needed, shelter. I mean, God, if supply is not going in, obviously we're not going to be able to give these people non-food items, mattresses, clothing. Children spent the winter, hence the respiratory infections, without anything. Now they're spending the summer, the heat, in these flimsy structures. This is the humanitarian situation in Gaza. It's about protection. According to UNICEF, there's about 17,000 minors that are either unaccompanied or separated. 17,000. I'll talk to you about a new acronym that has been created for children in a bit. Solid waste. Back in December. Imagine now. Intervention of MSF, this droplet. I want you to pay attention not to what the slide says, but to everything that is scratched out. Look at how many scratched out things you see in this slide. You know why? These are the facilities that MSF opened or MSF supported and had to evacuate because of the security situation. We have evacuated from 13 different health structures since the beginning of the war because we didn't have access, safe access for our teams. You know how difficult it is to open and then close again? And we are not talking about clinics only. We're talking about a maternity hospital with 6,000 patients that we only MSF saw, right? We had burn and trauma units. We had a trauma stabilization point in Al-Mawasi that we had to close on the 30th of May because of the severe events that we were seeing, okay? On one occasion, we had about 28 dead arriving at the same time and 180 wounded. How is this? Which team is going to deal with that? You have to some of the doctors, friends of mine, spoke to me about some of their experiences in stepping over children that were dead to arrive to the living in the emergency room when these mass casualties arrive. Okay, and then we leave hospitals and then we go back to them. Like we're back to Al Nasser Hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in Han Yunis. We left back in February and December. We went back now. We are doing maternity there now. We move our stuff. We try to adapt. And we do surgical attention. We do post-operative care because a patient that has been operated upon needs many, many, many more visits and wound care. Postpartum for the pregnant women, physiotherapy, health promotion, mental health. Then the health centers. I have to tell you that back in March and February, we did see a spike in severe acute malnutrition and moderate acute malnutrition. The volumes we see are immense. This Shabura clinic, I had the pleasure of opening, shall we say. Shabura clinic closed in May, and it had performed 36,000 consultations, half of them pediatric, so children, in 4 months. Like, I'm wondering, so now it's closed. So where do these people go? I mean, it's just holes, the whole of the healthcare system, right? It's incredible. When I speak of security reasons, I speak of violent incidents, right? We've had 26 violent incidents. I'm giving you the micro world of MSF just so that you can synthesize the bigger picture, because we are just a small actor. Maybe one of the biggest that we have in Gaza, with the exception of the UN, but still a small actor. So if we have 26 violent incidents, that averages 3.7 incidents in 1 month against the teams of MSF, against the personnel. Then you have to add against other humanitarians, against the UN, etc. We have 440 staff in Gaza right now, rotating. Most of them are Palestinian. We were distributing 400,000, sorry, that's a mistake, 400,000 liters a day, 1,000 liters for 100,000 people a day. We put together a desalination plant. None of these striking numbers is big. None of it. Now there's no fuel. I'm not sure that we are continuing to distribute 400,000 liters. In May, we've had a lot of problems with distributions. And then we do distributions via local partners as well. And we distribute hygiene kits. So you see this little intervention of MSF, half of it is struck out. Some of the pictures. We opened this clinic Again, this is my picture. You can see me at the background, right? So it's real. And the clinic the next day was like this. I was wondering, where were they going before we opened? How did they even find out we opened? This is how needy Gaza is. See the lady with the little boy. Maternity. We closed this hospital. This picture doesn't exist now. We moved somewhere else. This is Al-Aqsa Hospital. Al-Aqsa Hospital has been, you've seen it in the news, in the middle area. After the attacks in Nuseirat, also the rescue of the hostages, that was a very, very deadly operation, right? You see, it's in the corridors. You see the columns. These beds are nowhere. They're not in a ward. That's how the practitioners work. And I'm not talking about MSF now, I'm talking about the local health practitioners. Some of the stories are horrific. I know that I'm running out of time here, but I want you to read these clumsy words. Shrapnel marks for life. I'll tell you a little story. I was in the clinic. A little girl comes, no more than 10, smiley and well-dressed. I thought she's accompanying some relative. And then she said to me, "Hi, I want to see the doctor." I said, you want to see the doctor yourself? He said, "Yes, I know. The doctor knows me." So I made way. The girl truly walked into the emergency room where we do wound care. It was just a clinic. It wasn't a hospital. The doctor waved at her immediately. So she said, "Come, Sarah." And she sat on the bed. And then a few minutes later, I could see that the entire back of the girl was marked with shrapnel. I don't even know if this can be removed. These are foreign objects, right? This can cause kinetic. This is a signature mark that she's going to live with. And she's lucky. She's lucky because she may have to go to the doctor again and again for her entire life, but at least she can move. I've seen children that cannot. This can't be in accordance to international humanitarian law. It can't be. There's something wrong here. These external fixators, if you didn't know this word, a trip to Gaza will educate you. There's hundreds and thousands of these external metallic fixations in the bodies of people, young and old, because of the fractures. So, I mean, they need to keep going to the doctor, right? These things they don't go away. It's a mark of how things are, right? So yeah, this is one of our nurses doing this day in, day out, and I know this because day in, day out, I was also there. Of people of all ages, people of all builds, women, grandmothers, humanitarian challenges. I'm nearing the end of my hour. I think I will speed up a bit. 272 humanitarian staff has been killed. It's a lot of people. You all remember the 7 international staff of the World Central Kitchen that were bombed on the 1st of April. But there's hundreds of others also. There's a new acronym in Gaza, WCNSF. This WCNSF stands for Wounded Child, No Surviving Family. So children that have lost everyone, they survived with whatever wound. So they also need to deal with the trauma. Sexual violence has been used for both parties. And then we go to the medical personnel in terms of protection, right? We're nearing 500 medical staff killed, of whom 5 are colleagues of mine. Like, who kills medical staff at this scale? Hospitals in the north, one after the other, have been dismantled. Also in the middle area, and then recently in the south. There's 130 ambulances that are damaged, and there's very limited evacuation options for Gaza. So when you go in, you don't know when you're coming out, first of all, because you can't really coordinate, but you definitely don't know if you can come out if you're wounded. And it's likely that you would be wounded because you're medical personnel or you're a humanitarian, these numbers show you that there is no protection. And then the aid flow. The aid flow in May was 97 trucks a day, on average, right? 97. Pre-war, it was 500. This includes also the maritime corridor that did not work. It was functional for 2 weeks. Then they had problems with the weather from Cyprus. This is the corridor from the sea. They said that even if Rafah is attacked, we will have the sea. No, we don't have the sea. There is no sea. These are distractions from the problem. Glaring distractions. As a lot of actors said, including the UN, open the borders. It was resolved. Open the borders so that aid comes in. MSF has brought in 7 cargos from Rafah, Karem, Shalom from the beginning, 76 trucks. We began with 25 trucks in March. Only 2 trucks came in from our trucks in May. Only 2. Aid doesn't come in. And of course, because aid doesn't come in, people are restless. And I have been a witness to a looting. And lootings are very frequent. People stop the trucks. They steal. They do. They don't have enough. That shows you the desperation. The desperation proves to you that there is no flow of aid. They jump on trucks. I have seen people jumping on the open trucks and then throw things out for their comrades to take. This is a rhetorical question. So it's for the day after. If the schools are utilized as shelters, because people are everywhere, there's about, according to UNICEF, there's about 625,000 students with no access to schooling right now. So how exactly is Gaza going to recover education for this generation is a mystery. These are impossibilities. These are humanitarian possibilities, and we're still discussing the ceasefire. So let's talk about the international community for a bit, and with this I will close. So on the 26th of January, okay, this is the end of January. It's already late because it's 2.5 months, almost 3 months after, almost 4 months after the 7th of October, the International Court of Justice issues provisional measures and orders Israel to take action to prevent acts of genocide. And everybody reacts, but because this is not how it should be. We shouldn't be speaking of measures from the International Court. And of course, nothing is implemented because nothing is unforeseeable. 22nd of February, MSF takes a stand before the UN Security Council. Our Secretary General calls on the Security Council in a special briefing. We were invited as independent observers. They invited us. And we called on them based on a series of incidents, of observations, of témoignages, of testimonies. And we called on them to demand an immediate and sustained ceasefire, not like the one that we had experienced in November. That lasted for 7 days, and then pounding began more fierce than before. And I will tell you also that the days leading to the ceasefire, the 48 hours leading to the ceasefire in November, the truce, it was a truce, it wasn't even a ceasefire. The bombings were incredible. The team of MSF, I remember one night, got together because the walls were trembling so hard that we didn't know what was going on. And then we realized that in some sort of a distorted military sense, because the truce was agreed, Israeli forces had to complete a certain number of tasks before the truce. That's what we gathered, because suddenly, activity went through the roof, military activity. So we did this on the 22nd of February. Did anything happen? No. 25th of March, finally, the Security Council convenes again and orders an immediate ceasefire. This time, they agree on it. This is after 3 US vetoed resolutions. And that's the 25th of March. We're still two months and a half further, and nothing happened, even with the Security Council resolution, which is supposedly foreseeable. 20th of May, the International Criminal Court steps in. The prosecutor requests arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister, for the defense chief, and the Hamas leaders. Everybody reacts against that. Everyone, both parties. Israel is not even a member of the International Criminal Court, but the occupied territories are. So there are consequences. The Rafah offensive is ongoing anyway, in full disregard of the order given by the International Court of Justice on the 24th of May that ordered Israel to halt immediately the assault on Rafah. Everybody disagreed with the assault on Rafah. Why? Because as we saw on the 8th of June, the operation to rescue 4 lives killed another 274, according to the Ministry of Health, and injured about 700 in one single day. In our hospitals, in the hospitals that we supported on that day, okay, we saw striking numbers. We saw, let me find this. So hundreds of people in Al Nasser. So on the 8th of June, we received 60 heavily injured people in Al Nasser on the day, including children. And in Al-Aqsa, there were 490 people injured and 190 arrived dead. One day. During that week, more than 800 people were killed, 2,400 injured. In that week, there has to be something wrong here. If the International Court of Justice says that this is an assault that shouldn't happen, if the US doesn't agree with it, if nobody agrees with it, and it happened, and these are the results, there has to be something wrong here. This is a mosque that I photographed. It's a mosque. It was empty most of the time. And I continue. The Secretary General adds IDF, the Israeli forces, and Hamas to the UN annual list of offenders that have committed violations against children. Again, everybody strongly reacts that this should not be the case. This report is going to come out. It's the famous annual report of the UN about children and armed conflict. It's about to come out on the 18th of June. On the 10th of June, 2.5 months later, from the day that the UN Security Council orders an immediate ceasefire, the US proposal comes on to the table again, and it is ratified by the UN Security Council. That's on the 10th of June. For a long 3-phase ceasefire process. That's the best we could do. Is it agreed? It's not. We're still trying. Nothing works. I'm sorry to say that nothing works, but for us, it's incredible to see that every day that goes by, war crimes are taking place. The UN Commission of Inquiries, this is from the UN Human Rights Council, Independent International Commission of Inquiry for the occupied Palestinian territories, including East Jerusalem and Israel, concludes that war crimes, violations, and abuses of international humanitarian law and international human rights law have taken place by both parties. Both during, this is for the interval of the 7th of October to the 31st of December. It's not even examining the last 5 months. The last 5 months, yes. For Israel, it's concluded. Israel is concluded in that factual findings investigation to have committed crimes against humanity, in the disproportionality that you all know. These are all things that happen. A point on the UN Agency for Relief Works for the Palestinian people, an agency that has been around forever, that has a network that none of the humanitarian actors will ever have, knowledge that none of us will ever have, experience and acceptance by the people that none of us will ever have. Okay, had 12 of its members, its members number in the thousands, more than 3,000. Okay, 12 of its members are accused by Israel to have been involved in the 7th of October attacks, and 11% of the staff as active members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. None of this has been proven. Okay. In May, Israel presents a bill that needs to be voted, and subsequent bills related to that, designating a UN agency as a whole as a terrorist organization. A UN agency as a whole. Okay? Like, what's the next step? This means that, I mean, we open the doors. First of all, UNRWA will not have any license to operate, which means warehouses, stocks, thousands of people trained are gone. Split second, gone. Okay? No immunity anymore. And of course, this opens the door to attacks that could be unleashed. UNRWA had their offices already attacked in Jerusalem. So, and then you have a number of states that are UN members. They're members of the UN. Some of these states support Israel. Like, we need to understand that as UN member states, we should stand against the criminalization of aid. So these are very paradoxical things. And then you have the UN General Assembly that also called for truces, humanitarian ceasefire, and then the resolution in May with a striking majority in favor on full membership of Palestine. These are all acts of solidarity in some ways, but they don't change the reality on the ground. And the reality of the ground are these guys. When I was in Gaza, we formed a team immediately, because after the 7th of October, of course, it was chaos. So we put teams together again with many people. We found many people. When I showed this picture to the people outside, I sent it out. A lot of people asked me, why are they smiling? I don't know why they're smiling. I think they feel that they're doing something that is worth their while. And I will close with the messages. We've been calling for a ceasefire from day one. Immediate ceasefire. Immediate and sustainable. Stopping the offensive on Rafah that is ongoing. Protect the medical and humanitarian mission. I remind you, in the micro world of our small team, we've had 26 violent incidents against our teams. That can't be the way to go. Flow of aid should go in. Irrespective of what the Israeli authorities say, aid is not going in. Everywhere, not just in the south. It has to reach the north. We don't have time. And if you have an International Court of Justice that has issued provisional measures, then these measures need to be implemented. And the states supporting Israel that are also members of the International Court of Justice, as part of the UN mechanism that we have set up as a whole to regulate this kind of situations, we have a responsibility as member states. I say we because I mean the whole world, to ensure that the rulings of this court are implemented. Otherwise, what is the point? And if not, then we're morally and politically complicit, and we need to know that. This is a picture that I have taken one night from our house. It's phosphorus. It's not phosphorus in any illegal way or whatever. I mean, I don't want to go into that. It's phosphorus that practically stays as lighting bulbs. It stays in for 15-20 minutes. It helps illuminate the battlefield so that you know where the enemy is. It's incredible. I've taken it from the house and I asked the colleagues to explain to me what I was seeing. These colleagues, I'd like to end with a comment on them. The colleagues, the Palestinian colleagues, Palestinian people, whatever. So in the mornings, I've never heard this before. There comes this question in Arabic, how are you? And the answer is always the same, alive. That's the morning greeting. Please remember that life in Gaza, in Rafah, and in Gaza, and wherever now is very random. There is no place, designated or not designated, that is safe in Gaza right now. For the children, for their mothers, for the fathers, for the grandmothers, for no one. For the foreigners, for the medicals, for the humanitarian, there is no safe place. And the mere fact that it is not me today does not mean that it will not be me tomorrow. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Could you close your microphone? Okay. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation. Hopefully it's going to be eye-opening for those watching. Let me remind the chat that if you have any questions, don't forget to type them out. So we're going to go forward with our Q&A session now. Our first question is from one of the CEMMIS researchers, Nicholas Papachrysostomou, who wants to ask about the reports that the Pentagon denied about infiltrated, quote-unquote, U.S. soldiers that entered Gaza to free hostages through humanitarian aid shipments. Do you have? So he asks if you have any insights from the field on this report.
Thank you for the question. I'd like to clarify a few things. As MSF, we have a specific task to take care of, and that is immense and daunting. So whether there are soldiers involved in all kinds of acts, for us, doesn't really make a difference. I mean, for me, what matters is that aid flows in through the corridors in a way that reaches the people. So I don't have any inside information, but I wouldn't even look for this type of information because I have so much else that worries me than the politics behind of what is going on. For us, hostages of both sides should be freed, and people should be allowed into all their rights as seen by international humanitarian law. And in this particular case, the Palestinian people in Gaza are not being served at all, as the hostages are not, Israelis or no Israelis. So I don't have any answer that would satisfy our colleague, but what I may get a lot of these questions. So I apologize if I'm not going to be able to answer these questions, but for me, these are the messages that I'm interested in propagating, not only to you, but to all authority. I don't know if
I'm sorry. I think I muted it by accident. No, but thank you for answering that. We know it's a hard question, but it's really interesting because how we see. Do you hear me? Right. Okay. So it's really interesting because a lot of the humanitarian activities and a lot of the humanitarian actions taken by so many humanitarian organizations, whether they're the UN or MSF, they get caught in the middle of politics, and it's always interesting to hear how it's being handled. And I mean, MSF, more than any other organization, has a very safe distance. I mean, if anything other than the good work on the field, you're also known for having a very, very good distance, if I'm allowed to use this phrase, from the politics. And you know what really interests me is that this advocacy and this numbers in itself speak for themselves so much that honestly, it sounds, it's more devastating. Every time I look at these numbers, it's even more devastating. However, I'd like to, to ask something you mentioned regarding the West Bank. You said that if the things escalate, it will aggravate the humanitarian situation. What is what is a humanitarian situation perceived to be in the West Bank? Because there are bombings that happen to Kerem and Jenin, as you said, there are raids. But from what we hear, there's some hindrance of medication, of electricity cuts, water cuts, bombing the sewage, but we don't see it taking a humanitarian, how can I put this, a humanitarian dimension, precisely because Gaza is in such a terrible condition, you know? So if you could elaborate a little bit on that, thank you.
Thanks, Zakia. Just allow me to maybe clarify a little bit the stance of MSF. So there is no safe distance in such crisis, if you allow me. So MSF is very clear on the messaging, okay? And we have no problem describing what we see on the ground, and I have described what we see on the ground, and saying that this is consequences of how the Israeli forces act, okay? About disproportionality, about not taking precautionary measures, about not heeding to any of the international bodies and all that has happened and that I have explained. And that was the message that our Secretary General also conveyed when we asked for an immediate ceasefire, for the reasons that we explained, for the reasons that we are seeing. So the questions that go into the details of either military operations, intelligence operations, or politics, if you like, between the parties in the negotiations. Yes, these are questions that we're not answering, right? Because it's not our job. But our job is to tell you all what our medical teams, our logistics teams, and our coordination teams see on the ground, so that you know what is happening. To come to your question on the West Bank, I will again excuse myself because, first of all, I have not been, so I'm not going to speak to you in the same way. And I'm not as well informed as I am about Gaza, but I have been in the meetings, and I speak with our colleagues, because MSF, as Doctors Without Borders, we have extensive interventions in Gaza, in Tulkarem, in Nablus, in Jenin. So we support hospitals, health centers, distribute whatever. And it's true that we have seen violence again, violent incidents, that we have taken testimonies of victims, patients of ours. And it's a disconcerting situation because, as you say, it's overshadowed by Gaza, right? The incursions are more and more violent, and they last longer. And of course, in the Tulkarem, we had 14 dead in like days or less even. And so, then all of what we hear is really pointing out to a deteriorating situation, which worries us a lot, right? There's often cut of access. We have trouble communicating with our teams. We often wonder about the safety of the teams. And as I said, in Gaza, you see this pattern of evacuating our sites and going to different sites and starting again. Always there, but our operations are disrupted. And it's the same concerns riddle the West Bank. So this is what we are afraid that a further escalation will make things all the more impossible. And they are difficult to begin with. Thanks.
I will hog the conversation and ask more. The next question, it's also very interesting, is also from our colleague Atemi. She's wondering how do you get the numbers basically of the casualties? Is there being on Gaza, that means is there some sort of cooperation with the Hamas Ministry of Health? I mean, it is well known based on the UN reports that Hamas doesn't really deviate from the real numbers that then the UN provides. I mean, at least on previous wars. But given the intensity of the situation, and I mean, I don't actually, how do you even count the casualties given the mass graves that need to be because of the hundreds of people that go nearly every day? Could you like to comment on that?
Yes, that's a very good question. It's also a tough question to answer. First of all, let's clarify one thing. MSF doesn't count. So we are not in a position to count. As I told, please remember that we are a small periscope in the humanitarian catastrophic vastness of this void. So we are not able to see what is going on. We are able to see what's going on in Al-Aqsa, strategic point indeed, in Al-Nasser now. And 2 months before, we weren't able to see what was going on in Al-Nasser hospital. So it's very unclear what is really happening. What I can tell you is that we have worked in Gaza since 1989. We have a lot of experience with the medical practitioners in Gaza, Ministry of Health practitioners. We know how they work. They obviously accumulate the data from the mass casualties, from the hospitals, from their sources, and then come up with these numbers that we have discussed. This is the source. The source is the Ministry of Health. Is it true or is it not true? It's very difficult to say if it's true or it's not true, right? But the numbers are immense. To speak of 37,000 people dead in 8 months, in 250 days, that's 150 dead in a day, as I told you, is immense. So I don't know if someone can say it's not 150 people dead in a day, it's 120. Does that make it right? Does that make it better? Does that make it? I'm not sure. I can tell you this though, from our observations, in the hospitals we have been, in the mass casualty events that we have seen, in and out, in the mass bombings that we have heard, we don't think that there is a tremendous exaggeration in the numbers. So from the sampling that we do, okay, and the fact that we have experience with the medical practitioners of the Ministry of Health, doctors, these numbers, I'm afraid, as the UN says, may represent our reality on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you. So one more question from another one of our team members at CEMMIS, from Haritini Petrodaskalaki. She asked, if the roads opened and humanitarian aid could flow freely, how long would it take for the Gazans to return to some form of normalcy, in your opinion?
Right. That's an even tougher question. And it's right. It's right. People want to know, right? I mean, this is a biblical devastation. So how long? The Gaza that I've seen and the Gaza that I speak to my colleagues of right now has nothing in common to the one prior to the 7th of October. We're talking about a distraction. So what you see is true. I remember back a few months ago, I got a picture from some colleagues that came from the north and they were in the south displaced. And they said, you know, our home, our house, the one that we invested in, seems to be holding. It didn't have any reason to hit it anyway, but seems to be holding. A few weeks later, I received pictures on my phone. I didn't know how. I didn't check my messages. I just saw from the gallery, and I saw bombed apartments. And I just suspected, and then I saw my messages, and the message was, our turn has come. So in Gaza, I mean, now with the percentages that we see of destruction of the buildings, it's gonna take ages. I don't know how long, because I don't even know how this is going to be negotiated, right? I mean, in order for the reconstruction to begin, you need to have some stability. So hospitals, how the health system will work so that these people can have some way of going back to normality, because life doesn't stop, right? If I'm hypertensive in Gaza, it's not because of the war. I need to be going somewhere. I need to find medication. So how long is this going to take me to get back to my normal life? Well, it's going to take me as long as the hospitals and the health centers are reconstructed and are restocked with the medication. In the way we're going, I mean, I don't know how long the, 17 out of 36. So it's about 20 hospitals, 19 hospitals that need to be brought back to life so that these people can be served. And 60% of the health centers need to be brought back to life so that you know, your communal patients can be served, and then the houses have to go back to life so that the displaced have somewhere to go back to, and then the mosques have to go back to life so that people can pray. And the mini markets that I started my presentation with also, so it's everything really. This is what one needs to understand. It's everything. And for this to happen, you need to have some stability, some administration and some governance that will ensure that reconstruction can take place. And we're so far away from that at this point, I'm afraid I don't have an answer for this question, except to say that it's not going to be in a few months.
I first of all would like to thank you again for going through each question so meticulously, and the presentation. I mean, we always think we know when we watch the news, or even people that are experts in established studies from political or regional analysis, but it's always a slap in our faces, you know, to see what's to all our faces, wherever you stand, with whomever you are. I mean, in terms of inclinations, to see what's happening. Unfortunately, the time is up for any further questions. We honestly, as CEMMIS, would like to thank you. We really appreciate this insight, because it really will allow us to see things in a different light and take in consideration also other factors in our analysis. This video will be uploaded tomorrow on our YouTube channel. You could follow us in CEMMIS, whether it's on Facebook, Twitter, or our YouTube channel. I would honestly like to thank you personally for making it in such a hot day to give the lecture, and also I'd like to communicate my appreciation to MSF's work, not only in Gaza, but also always being there on the ground, you know, in the worst times, to assist people and do the human thing that we, the rest of the world, can't do. Thank you a lot for being here.
Thank you, Stavro, and thank you, Zakia, for the opportunity, because it's through institutions like yourselves, like the Center, the CEMMIS, the Center for Mediterranean, Middle Eastern, and Islamic Studies, that we get to propagate the message. Any way that any channel that will give us space to speak of what we see is for us very important. I thank you once again for the interest in MSF's work, and I thank the audience that I can't see, but I truly appreciate that at 9 o'clock Greek time, there's people that are sitting and having this discussion and conversation with us. Thank you very much, and good evening to all.
So I know I'm echoing very badly. I would just like to thank you as well, very briefly, just to thank you, and also remind everyone that we have one more e-lecture to go before the summer break, which will be our season finale. Yes, you heard it here first. There will be another season.